very good morning to you and welcome to my thought for the day. Just going to have a look today at the lovely first couple of verses of the book of Hebrews. This was a book written by somebody who doesn't actually put their name in the text. We don't actually know who wrote it, this book of the Hebrews. Many people think it was Paul who wrote it, but he never wrote any letters, as far as we know, that did not have his name in the introduction, in the beginning, and at the end. And his letters have a particular style and use particular words and phrases, and this letter is very different. And it is speculated that it was written by someone completely different, and possibly was not named because it was written by a woman, and probably would not have been accepted by society at that time if it had a female name attached to it. All this is speculation. It doesn't really matter, because it's one of the most powerful books in the New Testament in its entirety, because its whole aim is to show quite clearly how immensely superior Jesus is to anything that ever came before him. Superior to every single Old Testament prophet and person, superior to Moses, superior to Elijah, superior to Isaiah, superior to Jeremiah, all these great men, superior to even his forefather David. Jesus, the ultimate expression of God, and that his covenant, the covenant that he inaugurated, instituted with his blood, when he started, when he sat at the Last Supper with his friends, and he said, "This is my blood of the new covenant." It was the seal. They sealed covenants with the shedding of blood, and this he spoke out because it was the start of something completely different to the Old Testament way of doing things. And it is very easy to settle into a way of doing things or a way of thinking that makes Jesus just the next chapter after the Old Testament closes. But in fact, everything about Jesus is so radically new, so radically different, that the compilers of the Bible called it the New Testament or the New Covenant. Even it all begins in Matthew, the New Covenant, the New Testament, because it's so different to the Old. We mustn't live by Old Testament covenant ways. The New Testament is radically different. It's so, I can't express it any other way. It is so completely different. And Hebrews begins with, in many and various ways, God spoke of old to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by a Son. Hebrews starts by saying there's lots and lots of things God did to communicate with people in the Old Testament, in the Old Covenant, in times past. But now his final word, his last expression, is Jesus. There's never going to be anything that tops Jesus. And anybody who says, I've got something that Jesus didn't have, or I can tell you something new that is more important and that you have to add in to what Jesus revealed about God, must be wrong based on this verse alone. Because the ultimate, the final revelation of God is Jesus. So we should never ever get caught up with anything that doesn't have Jesus at the absolute center, and doesn't have Jesus with his message of good news and the gospel and peace, and him as the Son of God, the expression, the final expression of God. In these last days he has spoken to us by a Son. It's interesting, the words that have been inspired to the writer of the Hebrews, because we've been thinking about how the Word became flesh. And, this is all about God spoke to the Old Testament prophets, and they wrote it down. The word of God came to them and they wrote it down, or they spoke it out, they preached it, and then wrote it down. So it's words again. God gave the words to the Old Testament prophets to write down, which brought about a revelation of who Jesus was going to be and what he was going to be like. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. The Word that became flesh was the pure expression of God. Hebrews talks about the days as the last days. We are still in the last days. That period of the last days will end when Jesus returns. And we don't know when that will happen. But for now, whenever you think about anything to do with God, test it out. And whenever you hear anything, test it out with the words of Jesus and the behavior of Jesus and the revelation of Jesus, because he is the ultimate expression of God. In many and various ways, God spoke of old to our fathers by the prophets, but in these last days he has spoken to us by a Son. God has actually taken the trouble of speaking to you and speaking to me in words we can understand, in a way that we can relate to. He has used a man, and I don't think there's anyone in the entire world now who would not say that Jesus was a very good man. But he was more than that, and is more than that. And Hebrews goes on to describe so many things about him, but I'm not going any further. Just to spend some time today thinking, if you can, about the amazing way that God spoke to Old Testament prophets, and then about how he spoke through Jesus to any who could. And how often did Jesus say, "Let him who has ears to hear, let him hear"? Because he was speaking the revelation of God to the people. And even when he was present with them, there were many who didn't hear what he had to say. Let's make sure that we hear what he has to say to us today. Have a great day. God bless you, whatever you're doing today, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.